Welcome to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast. Well, thanks for joining us on the Journal of Biophilic Design today. We're going to be talking about biophilic design, hotels, architecture, sustainability, and a whole lot more today. We've had a whole issue actually on hotels and leisure, which came out at the end of 2024. And I do encourage you to take a look at it on our website, journalofbiophilic.design.com. You can download the PDF version for $4.99 or even become a subscriber and read the whole back catalogue as well for just $9.99 a month. It keeps us, we're a not-for-profit, and it keeps us afloat. But today we're joined by Nicholas de Klerk. He's architect, associate partner, head of hotels at Purcell Architects. He's got over 20 years experience designing hospitality, retail, residential and workplace projects in the UK, Middle East and South Africa. But alongside hospitality design, Nick has a particular interest in working with existing buildings and improving their performance, efficiency, and also sensitively modernising them through refurbishment or adaptive reuse. He believes it's important work in the context of both conserving heritage and also addressing the climate crisis. And he's also a tutor at London School of Architecture and at Loughborough University, as well as mentoring with the Stephen Lawrence Foundation and Transition London. So I'm really actually thrilled to have you here today with us, Nick. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
That's lovely. Well, could you start by telling us a little bit about yourself, please, and what you do?
So as you put in your introduction, which was fantastic. Thank you. I'm Nick de Klerk. I'm an architect of some 20 plus years experience internationally, and I lead the hotels team here at Purcell, who are the world's largest by headcount specialist heritage architecture firm.
Okay, amazing. Thank you. What got you into architecture in the first place?
Interesting question. Architecture is something I became interested in quite young, without any prior connections or introductions to the profession. No family members, no friends who were architects. It's something that I became interested in. So I really had to make my own way and find my own way into the profession. Perhaps because of my training and work experience, which has been at a couple of universities internationally and working in several different countries. I'm really interested in social spaces and how people use them. It's been fascinating over the course of my career to work in different places in a wide variety of contexts and to understand how people use space differently, and actually more importantly, to understand how we use them in the same way and what our common points are. For me, hotels, and I've ended up doing hotels for the last, I'd say, 17 years or so of my career, so quite a long time. They're really complex buildings and they accommodate a lot of different uses. They're places of work, places of leisure, of escape, and I love the challenge of having to integrate all these aspects into one building. I also like being able to visit them afterwards, which isn't always possible with building projects, and to see how people use them.
That's true, actually, isn't it? I know you don't think of that. Yeah, of course. Like if you do workspaces or whatever, I suppose it must be quite hard unless you
Or
think.
private houses or anything like that, you can't go back to them afterwards.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, because you can go in and sort of anonymously almost, can't you? Go and have a cup of coffee and see how they're being used. It's interesting you're saying about the social spaces or the social aspect of buildings and how that interested you. That my background as well in classics, I was really fascinated in the ancient world, how they created spaces for community, for civic duties, for all that kind of thing, but also like the agora, the collective marketplace and things. I think I found that really, really interesting. So it's seeing how it's manifesting in your work as well. And obviously hotels, create those sort of congregation spaces as well, don't they?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you've obviously designed some really beautiful spaces, which we're going to talk about very shortly. But biophilic design is important to you, I know, and you're really obviously really sensitive about sustainability, but also about this inside out, having the views and having like nature and sort of direct connection with nature, patterns or real. Can you tell us a little bit about why biophilic design is important to you, please?
Before I even considered architecture as a life, as a profession, I was very fortunate to grow up quite close to nature on a not quite a working farm, but not far off, where we grow in vegetables and fruit, and we looked after animals. It's a privilege to be able to live like that in that way, close to nature, and I'm very aware that it's not a privilege that many people have. And even now, at this point in my life, I choose to live in places that have close access to nature, and London in particular has some incredible public spaces and parks that really make the city and make it a wonderful place to live. So for me, when I bring all these strands together, I understand on a very fundamental level how access and proximity to nature are a basic human need, and I try to integrate that into projects wherever I can.
Yeah, exactly. And it is a fundamental human need, isn't it? It kind of, I mean, I don't know how you feel when you see some sort of buildings go up, or new developments as well. I mean, I know it's not hotels, but you see these new developments or new sort of town planning, and they don't have, they say they have got, but they always might have like a little pond or something in the corner rather than integrating it. Actually, actually the building's actually in the landscape.
Absolutely, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's often an afterthought rather than being something that actually drives the project.
Yeah, exactly. And it should be a different mindset, really, shouldn't it? I mean,
Absolutely.
there's so much evidence out there. It's like it's madness, really. I mean, awe is something that we talk about in biophilic design, and there's basically those moments where your jaw drops in real life and metaphorically. I think your designs and the stuff that you've done really inspires those moments of awe in a space. Can you tell us about how you, and it's a bit of a kind of maybe a sort of a challenging question, but how do you go about creating that feeling in a space? What sort of things go through the process?
Often this involves element of surprise, or an unexpected transition from one kind of space to another, so where you're not expecting it. And in hotels, we often use that as a device where you enter through a constrained space and you emerge into a much larger space, and it just takes your breath away, basically, because you're not expecting it. And it's that sense of unanticipated anticipation of surprise that really gets people. And makes you sort of dwell on that transition and think about how you are in the space. I think that's quite important. So we often do that in hotels, and actually in our Hicks project, which we'll come on to talk about, we did exactly that, where we repurposed the concept anyway. We repurposed the old parking entrance, which is dark and constrained, and went through that space to emerge into the barrel vaulted agricultural hall, which is light and top lit and full of plants. And it was the contrast between those two experiences that generates that sense of awe.
Yeah. So that's it's kind of like that's actually when you phrased it like that, it does actually. I'm thinking about the places where I've been, where you go from a dark space or you go from like somewhere that's quite boring and then you open the door, and it could be anything to do with
Mm.
like scale, or it could be just something so beautiful, something so
Yes.
harmoniously colored or something like that that you just feel, wow, it uplifts you. Yeah.
Absolutely, and yeah, you're quite right to point out it's also about textures, it's about sensations, it's about yeah, and often we have to work at both those scales. We're thinking about space and about light, we also think about materials, and what it is that you feel in a tactile sense or a sensory way when you're in space.
Yeah, and and we're gonna talk about the Higgs thing in a minute, but just want to go back on that sensory aspect. For you, I mean, how do you bring in that sensory aspect to into your architecture? I mean, how do you do that? I mean, that's quite like, it's about 1,001 questions in one, really. But kind of if people are listening, I mean, what are some key things that you go to maybe to introduce, or how do you go about deciding what sensory aspects, or do you feel like you need to bring in all those sensory experiences in a space?
There's a useful shorthand in the hotel sort of design talk, as it were. We call it the guest experience, and simply put, it's really thinking about how people move through a space and what they experience, and exactly what you want them to take away from that space. I mean, where we are now in hotel design, and this changes over time. I mean, as long as I've been in the profession anyway, and we now talk about space being transformational, where people actually learn something or are changed by their experience. People don't want to go into a hotel experience and come out feeling exactly the same as they did when they went in. They really want to learn something or feel like they've benefited from that space. And that's partly architecture, that's partly experience, but it's also operational. So it's what people plan and program in spaces, which goes back to that social question we talked about earlier. Um, I mean, so I'll give you one quick example about a hotel I worked on in Henley on Thames. This is before I joined Purcell. But it's an old coaching inn, medieval coaching inn, which had been rebuilt by the Georgians and again by the Victorians. So lots of change incrementally over centuries, literally. And then in the 20th century, lots of sort of poorly thought through change where they'd blocked up entrances and closed up access points, and which really sort of started to disguise the real sort of charm and value of the building. And one of the key things we did was to take away a lot of those poor changes. We took out an old boiler room. We created a connection between the main entrance, which was a carriageway originally, to the courtyard, and reintegrated it back into the city fabric. So the building recaptured its civic qualities, and now it's become a part of the kind of the streetscape, a part of the townscape where people like to be because it feels integrated.
That's beautiful. That's opening it out, isn't it? That's kind of
Yeah,
giving it life back, almost helping
yeah,
it breathe again.
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely lovely. I'd like to talk about the Hicks project that you did, this hotel project, this sort of conceptual place, this sense of space. Can you explain, kind of what it was really initially? What was it? And then, kind of we can maybe just sort of, discuss a little bit about how you did it.
So Hicks is shorthand for a trade show. Effectively, it's called the Hotel Interiors Experience, which happens every year in November at the Business Design Centre in Islington, and it's really focused on products. So designers use them for their projects, but also it has a really good conference program that goes along with it, and they think quite conceptually about hotels and how they work, and that conversation is really part of what we do. It's not just design and technical issues, is also conceptual. So I think it brings those things together in a very good way. So last year we were approached by the team who run the show to develop a concept. There were three other architects who also prepared different concepts, and ours was quite different from theirs. And they wanted to understand what, given that they focused on hotels as part of their kind of their mantra, as it were, they asked us to think about what this building would look like as a hotel. So, as heritage specialists, we always look to safeguard the special characteristics of a building that are drawn from their heritage, but we also live in the same world as everybody else does with the same challenges. So we also like to try and address contemporary issues. And in this case, that was issues of climate crisis, food futures, food security, all those kind of issues they're all hot button issues at the moment, and the things that we have to address. And we thought we could bring them together in a way that was quite unique. Um, so our concept, if I could just go on a little bit, was really examining our relationship to food. And this goes back to, again, my early point about growing up close to nature and where food comes from, and understanding that people's relationship with food is different. And we thought, but actually, as a transformational experience, we could do something about that. We could bring food and food production and leisure close together and see how people could benefit from that kind of cross-pollination, as it were. And because you've got a big space which is naturally lit, there's plenty of scope to do that. Typically, vertical farming is done in a closed environment, so it's artificially lit and controlled, and we would do a hybrid with that. Yeah, so basically looking at different ways of growing food, and bringing people close to the source of food. So the food that they ate in the hotel, in the restaurant, would be produced on site, and that actually is happening with hotels internationally. People are integrating into their brand standards. So this is a thing that's starting to happen, but it's in very early days, and we were looking to bring those things not just as a practical consideration to where the food comes from, but also in terms of the guest experience and what they could take away from that. So we wanted to re-engineer that, and it's not going to solve all these problems, but it's certainly going to explore a territory where we could start solving these problems on a much bigger scale. So our concept looked at the beginnings of the building as an agricultural hall, where that came from, and we looked at how we might look at similar levels of. I mean, this goes back to a broader theme about the Industrial Revolution and the way in which the Victorians radically re-engineered our supply chains, the way in which we grow food, the way in which we supply food to cities, and we still live with the legacy of that today. I mean, the very idea of blueberries being shipped from Morocco or New Zealand is actually crazy if you think about it. But that's where the beginnings of this were. The idea that you could actually eat food fresh from that was grown some distance away found its beginnings in that system, basically. So we were looking at a way of actually drawing a link, a golden thread, as I called it, between that level of innovation and what we need to see now in addressing the issues that relate to the climate crisis, including food futures and food security. So we want to bring food production right back to the heart of the city and to our hotel.
Yeah, and can you explain? Can you sort of maybe describe it? I'm going to put pictures on the Journal of Biophilic Design website and the spiel that
Yeah.
goes with this podcast. But if people are not going to go to the website or they can't see it or whatever, can you describe the kind of what it looks like. Because
So
it's so visually amazing. It's so beautiful. And like we go back to that all thing, it really when you sent me that video, and I'm going to link the video to this as well. But oh my goodness, I just, you think, God, I just wish there were hotels that were built like that, or there was a hotel, or there was an office. Imagine if it was an office block. That's what I was thinking. Imagine if it was a workplace. It just takes a different leap of faith really to do that. But sorry, could you explain, sort of
I
describe?
mean, there is some precedent for that actually, and going quite a way back. If you look at the Ford Foundation headquarters in New York, which was a large internal atrium designed by Roche Dinkeloo, as I recall, and that was one of the first and it was designed as an internal atrium because of the weather conditions and bringing biophilia into the heart of
What was the
buildings.
name of that? Sorry.
The Ford Foundation headquarters in New York,
Oh, okay, right.
which and that's a large internal atrium, not for agricultural purposes, but just it had trees and planting in it, and that was quite a fashion in the 70s, I think. Um, but there is some precedent for it. But we saw this enormous space, which was designed for agricultural purposes. Um, and there's a natural fit with the hotel. We lined the sides with guest rooms, with balconies, all looking onto the internal space, which then became a civic space where growers, where local residents and tourists could come together. And that mix, I think, is critical to your experience at the hotel, and bringing growers as a third party, what you normally have. And just this sense of lush, it was almost like an inhabited ruin in a way. We wanted it to look like a sort of a relic of a past being retooled for a new future. I think it's really the way to look at it. But lush and dramatic and lots of plants and that sense of life sort of thrumming and growing in a space like that, but just not in the way it was before, just a different future. And just one more point, if I can add there. So we worked with Customs Bureau, who are an interior design studio, sort of boutique interior design studio, and they did that point that you mentioned earlier in terms of tactility, in terms of sensation, and they designed a series of activation points, bedrooms, restaurants, and sort of a sound bath. I think was the other thing we worked on. And it's all conceptual, but they did really powerful imagery about what the sense would be like of being in the space and what the biophilia brought to it. So I think it's important to think on that big sort of like structural level in terms of what the thing actually is and what it does, but also think on that sort of quite intimate sensory level as well. It has to function on both levels.
That's fantastic. And I'm going to put the link to the video actually in the spiel that goes with the podcast as
Yeah.
well. So thank you for that. Personally, from your perspective, how would you like to see architecture playing a role in sustainability and also regeneration of a place? I mean, how does biophilic design play a role in this?
I mean, there's a quote that does rounds quite a lot, and I think it is quite an important one by Carl Elefante, which says the greenest building that is one that already exists, and I think that's fundamental to our philosophy as a practice. We work with existing. We do some new buildings, but they're the exception rather than the rule. And it tends to be where it's in a sensitive conservation area where we're working with that as the asset. But typically our buildings exist, and we're working to make them, to improve them, to do fabric improvements, thermal enhancements, to make them better tooled for the future that they need to be, to work better, but keeping the character and the heritage that's there. And that's a strong link to community as well in terms of social value, also really important. And I think that's part of that's the field that we work in basically.
Mm. I think that's really interesting because especially if you've lived somewhere for a while, and there's an old building there that you might have seen when you were going to school. It might be a bit, but it might have character for whatever reason. It's got personal, and then you often you see a like developer or somebody, and they knock it down, and then they build this other thing, but then you lose that sense of memory and stories as well. So I love the fact what you're talking about here is about, you know, this sort of cohesive approach to design or to architecture, and about how you use architecture to create that sense of place, either
It's
to
belonging. Mm.
yeah, belonging. Yeah, what's a
Yeah.
beautiful way of putting it. Absolutely. Do you think, I mean, before we go on to the next thing, but do you think there's a change happening? Do you think that more people, I mean, I know you guys are like, the epitome of being so sensitive to place and community and people, and particularly yourself. You have a very uh, recognizable methodology, if you want, about the way you approach redesigning buildings or enhancing a building. Um, do you think? a change is happening? Do you think people are doing things in a different way, or at least wanting to? Or are we, I mean, I know we're still seeing like bulldozers going in and that kind of thing, but do you think there's a slight change of mindset in various parts?
So I think there absolutely is a fundamental shift underway in terms of how we approach things. But it's important not to be complacent because there's a lot more work to do. And you know, we're only, I mean, we're not quite keeping up, I think, with our targets, and I think we can't be complacent about that at all. But there is a lot in terms of material reuse. We look at on every project to see where we can reuse materials locally on site without shipping them off. We try and limit demolition. We're looking at adaptive reuse more and more in terms of how we use existing buildings. So I think, you know, I think there's an awful lot going on, and new buildings now are designed to such a high standard in terms of performance that you know they're going to yeah, that's the baseline in terms of the requirements. So I think there is a lot going on, but there's always more to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to sort of circle back, I mean, do you feel that biophilic design really has a role in this? How can we,
Absolutely.
yeah,
No, so I'll give you another example, another project we're working on, which is a collaboration. Something we also do a lot of working with other architects and other designers, as we did on the Hicks project. So we're working on the Oxford Institute of Digital Health with another practice called MBBJ. It's a high performance building designed to passive house and benefits principles, but our role on the project is in a very sensitive heritage context. So it has an enormous atrium which runs down the center of the building, which links visually different parts of the urban context. So it's right next to the Ratcliffe Observatory, which is an incredible piece of heritage. And that atrium also is full of plants. It's sort of has biophilia as its center. So I think if you consider that on an urban level, on a sort of experiential level, it's got that sense of awe that we talked about, and links, visual links to the past. So I think if you can bring all those things together, I think it makes for phenomenal projects.
amazing. Thank you for that. You're going to be doing in June, you're going to be part of the London Festival of Architecture, and I'm going to put a link to that. As people don't know what the London Festival of Architecture is, I do encourage you to have a Google and get
Mm.
involved and go and have walks around and everything. But you're going to do a really interesting one. Can you tell us a little bit about that? It's about the Victorian industrialization and this, like you mentioned earlier, this golden thread.
So our event will be at the beginning of June. I think it's on the first, actually, on the Sunday. And the Festival of Architecture is really interesting, and I've done a few events over the years with them because it engages with the wider public. It's not focused on other professionals, on other consultants, or even on people who build buildings. It's actually focused on the people who use them, which I think is really important. So it's an opportunity for people to meet and talk up close with the people who create the environments that they live and work in, which I think is really important. And what we're doing on this tour is it's based on our Hicks concept again, but looking at the wider urban context and what drove it. So the elements that link to it. So one of the stops will be close to Sadler's Wells, which was interestingly back in the Victorian era was a site of, we would call it wellness now, I think, but it was a fresh water source. There was a big hall with lots of biophilia in it. We've got a beautiful drawing of it. So it's that sort of link to place and meeting and biophilia in an urban context. Angel itself, if you know it well enough, it's got these incredibly high pavements either side, and that was primarily because it was a main staging post for all the cattle being driven through to Smithfield. So it was a way of separating pedestrians and people who lived in the area and moved through the area from all the livestock they were going through. And so our cities carry these kind of invisible heritages, which are fascinating to us. So we're taking stops like that, and then we'll end up at the Business Design Centre, talk about our concept a bit, and there'll be some refreshments afterwards as well. So it should be really interesting. And it's a way of just engaging with the wider public, which we all love doing.
Oh, that sounds really cool. So yeah, I'm going to put a link on the website and I'm definitely going to come along as well. So I really hope to see you there
Great.
and everything
I will be
else.
there.
Just a bit of an aside, my great grandfather, I think it was my great grandfather, was a performer. He performed at the Royal Agricultural Hall when they changed it into a performance
Amazing.
place. I know exactly. So when they done it up, it was like, yeah, it was pretty cool to kind of walk through there. When I first did the trade show there, I was like, wow, stepping in the footsteps. So actually, and it's funny when I watched your the video interview and then I saw the visuals, I was like, gosh, it's just so lovely. You're just giving life and energy back. I mean, the Business Design Centre is an interesting space anyway, but being able to envisage something that could be done differently. I mean, it can be quite soulless, can't it, really? Do you know,
It can be. I mean, we were very fortunate to work with a company called Historic Productions, who did a lot of research into the history of the building. Not a strictly normal heritage consultancy, which is more focused on policy and planning. This is really about the social history, and the building's been incredible. It was an agricultural hall, but it was also a postal sorting centre when the main post office site was bombed during the war. It was also a billeting centre for the military. It was also a place for balls and dances, as you said, circuses. So it's been so many things in its past, and this is another future, basically.
yeah. That's beautiful. I love it. I love it. I love it. Before I ask you the final magic question, Nick, and there are absolutely so many things that I could ask you about, other things as well, but I know, well, I hope you're going to be writing for our journal, so people
Mhm.
look out for that. That'd be amazing. But is there anything else that you would like to add at this point?
Yeah, not related to architecture at all. Just plant more trees. We love trees.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just more trees and local food.
Yes.
Yeah, local food for community, for everything else. Um, so yeah, final question then, Nick. If as I ask everybody who comes on the podcast, if you could paint the world with a magic brush of biophilia, what would it look like?
This is a really interesting question. I thought about it for quite a while, actually. And I go back to, so you mentioned some of the teaching I've done in the past. And one of the groups I worked with at the LSA, it's really fascinating because they were looking at a multi-age city, about how people could live together. And their concept about how they approached the city was considering it as a forest. Because forests are fantastically diverse biospheres where every element plays an important part in its sustenance and survival. And that's the way in which we need to look at cities as well. Yeah, places, I would see places, communities, and cities reimagined as forests, both real, because we need plants, we need trees, but also metaphorical in terms of how things work together. And I think that would be my magic brush, basically. If I had to go back and change everything with a one stroke, that would be it.
Thank you for listening to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast.